I hope everyone has enjoyed all of today's sessions, but if you're anything like me, you will have been looking forward in particular to this one. I'm joined now by a man who is a self-made billionaire, who began his professional career as an apprentice engineer, became a car salesman, then a mobile phone salesman, then a phenomenally successful entrepreneur. In 2008, his company, the Caudwell Group, which owned the Phones For You brand, was sold to private equity for around £1.5 billion. He has since developed his interest in several fields, not least philanthropy, where his charity, Caudwell Children, is dedicated to improving the lives of young people with autism and other conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Caudwell. So, John, as I mentioned there, you started out as an apprentice at Michelin. You became a mechanical engineer. While working that job at Michelin, you also ran a corner shop, ran a mail order business, selling clothing to motorcyclists. When you were doing all those different things, working incredibly hard, as you must have had to do, what was your mindset then? Were you thinking, I want to be a billionaire? Were you thinking, I want to be a success? What was driving you? Well,
certainly not a billionaire. That was way beyond any conception I could have ever had. I suppose it all started when I was 7 and I had this dream that I was going to be successful and philanthropic. The success was represented by being in the back of a chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce, and the philanthropy was winding the window down and giving £5 notes out to people in need. So that was the sense of destiny I had. When I was working at Michelin and trying these various jobs out, it was really more about survival, trying to make ends meet, because I did actually sit on an orange box in my lounge, cooking beans on toast on a Calagas stove that I'd borrowed from my mother's caravan. I've been there. When people today talk about not being able to eat or not being able to heat the house, I've been there. I know what it's all about. And I can very, very clearly remember those things. So it was not about billionaire, nothing of the sort. It was about financial security, having a reasonably comfortable life, about making sure that if ill health struck me down, I'd left my family in a decent position.
And in the early days of Phones For You, when you sort of pivoted, as you'd say now, to mobile phones, there were difficult times early on. I think I've read somewhere that in every month of the first 2 years of operations, the company made a loss. Were there times where you didn't believe it was going to be a success?
No, because I just really cast my mind back to when nobody had a home telephone. And 10, 15 years later, when I was in my 20s, everybody had a home telephone. And I couldn't really see why such a flexible piece of equipment, I didn't see it being owned by everybody because the tariffs were horrendously expensive. The whole experience of owning a mobile phone was beyond most people's financial reach, so I couldn't see it being in everybody's pocket. But we all know about the J-curve, the way prices tumble and volume goes up. I didn't really visualise that at the time, but I did visualise it being extremely useful and in high demand. So I always thought I could turn it into a success, and it's why I had to suffer the £2,000 a month loss, which in those days was quite a lot of money to me.
And was that the most difficult time in your entrepreneurial career, or is there another moment that sticks out?
I think, if any of you in the room have had difficult times, and I'm sure that's a lot of you, I can only say these people that say business is easy, they're either gifted or there's something very strange, because I can tell you that I had so many challenges, so many desperate moments, so many moments when I thought I was going to not necessarily sink, but I thought I couldn't really achieve it. That it was extremely, extremely stressful. I mean, the whole of my business life has been about huge challenge. Now, part of that is because of the challenges that were thrown at me, but part of it is that I'd got a very sort of dissatisfied personality. So I never stopped and said, oh, that's a success. If I grew by 100% and produced 2 million profit next year, I wanted 4 million and grow by 200%. And when you're that ambitious, there's no room for any satisfaction. So you don't smell the roses, you know, you don't walk around the garden and smell the roses. You're too busy chasing the next goal.
Have you learnt to smell the roses?
Well, there's various roses I smelt, like cycling up in the mountains, and you know, I mean, and enjoying my family. So there was satisfaction in various aspects of my home life. But did I learn to smell the roses in business? No. Same as in philanthropy now. You know, I can look at the fact that we've helped 65,000 children since I founded Caudwell Children. I can look at all that, but what's the good of that? Because there's hundreds of millions in the world that desperately need help. So there's always so much more to do that I'm not somebody who can sit back and complacently think, oh, well, I've achieved all that, it's a lot. Even if it is a lot, it's not satisfactory to me when there's so much more to be done.
Sure. And just thinking on more on that topic of sort of resilience and going through difficult times, as you said, there will be people in this room who run their own business or who work extremely hard and through difficult times to make a business successful. Are there things that you've learned when the chips are down that you can pass on? What are the most important things?
Well, I think, you know, resilient, it's a sort of an emotional state of mind, isn't it? A mental state of mind. And I think, you know, there were times in my business, especially when Motorola unilaterally cut off my entire supply of mobile phones for their own reasons, which were really malevolent reasons. And it was 89-90% of my business that just disappeared overnight. Now that's a really desperate situation. And how do you keep going? Well, you have some sleepless nights and you try and find a solution. Most of the time there is a solution, and I found an amazing solution to that, but I didn't know it would work. It was a multiple aspects of the solution that I put into place to try and get past this 90% loss of my business. And fortunately, the strategy worked. But the stress is enormous, and it's very difficult to take that balanced view about your life when your business is completely under threat of collapsing. So it's really difficult. I think I can't advise what you do in that situation, because you've just got to struggle and do the best you can. But the one bit of advice I would give about in life in general is that we've all had times, or maybe not all of you have, but lots of us have times in life where there's so many traumas and tragedies and challenges and problems stacked against you that it can seem like you're trying to climb the Alps and the Pyrenees and the Himalayas, and you see all these mountain ranges ahead of you. And if you see all those mountain ranges ahead of you, you know you can't do it. But rather than do that, let's just focus on the first hill. And if we get through that first hill, take the next one and take the next one, and eventually, with hard work, dedication, hopefully you get through them all and you get to where you need to be.
And you've identified several pillars or principles of success that I think are quite interesting to talk about. And that's a theme that is riffed on in your memoir, which is coming up soon. When is it released and what is it called?
7th of October, which is actually my birthday.
Fantastic. And in all good bookshops, I'm sure. But tell us about these pillars of success that you talk about.
Well, I think, you know, these pillars of success are very much down to the luck of birth, really. And when I talk about these pillars of success, people say, well, can you be successful without some of them? And of course you can. It just limits your success. And these pillars of success, and you could argue about one or two of them and say, you know, put different ones in, but I identified them as ambition, drive, passion, resilience, commercial intellect, and of course leadership. The ambition is what gets you fired up and gets you started and think, I really want to do that. But it's no good without the passion and the drive. That passion that emanates from your pit of your stomach through your fingertips that makes you just desperate to succeed. And that ambition, drive and passion will do that. But what happens if you've not got the health resilience and you run against health problems? And that's the luck of birth, really, because if you've got that resilience And I went through to hell and back many, many times, and my health never let me down. So I was very, very lucky that was the case. But resilience is a big one. For anybody starting a new business, you've really got to question your resilience. You may not have been properly tested, but if you have, question it, because if you think your resilience is weak, getting into a business where your life might be at stake, where your house, your mortgage and everything's at risk, if you haven't got the resilience to fight through, maybe best not to do it.
It's interesting to me to hear you describe health as such a contingent factor in resilience. For many people, it's a state of mind. Obviously, it's two things working together, but you can do things about your health, of course. You can eat well and exercise and so forth. Can you do things about the element of resilience that's in your sort of character that's more psychological rather than physical?
Well, mental resilience, I think, is one of the same things as physical resilience. It's just the characteristics that you're lucky enough to have or not. Some people, when heavily stressed, find it impossible to perform. Yeah. And that is then debilitating and stops you from doing what you need to do. I think most of us will have had times in our life when the stress has been so much that you couldn't quite perform at the level you needed to. But that resilience of being able to perform through stressful situations is really, really important. And then coming on to the other two factors, there's commercial intellect. Commercial intellect it's a sort of a very different form of intellect than the intellectual form of intellect that we all understand from people who are graduates and who have done extremely well at university and through education. Commercial intellect is all about understanding how to arbitrage, how to tip the playing. I liken it that it's like having a football field and you manage to tip the balance so that the ball is always going to the opponent's net or going towards it. It might not always get there, but it's biased in your favour because of your commercial intellect and ability to move things in your favour all the time. And then the final facet, which is not essential, but not essential if you're growing a smallish business, but if you're growing a large business, is leadership. The ability really to drive a team, to give blood, to give enormous amount of effort for the cause. And you have to set all the parameters in place that make people want to do that. Because you can't make them do it. You can lead them to it, but you can't make them do it. If people don't want to do it, they won't do it. So you've got to set everything in place from a leadership point of view where they'd run over hot coals for you and for themselves, because it is for themselves, not just for you. It's for the team and for the whole environment to be part of a world-winning team.
I think many people will have heard your idea of tipping the playing field in your favour and thought, that sounds fantastic, if only I could do it. Are there examples from your career that you can pick out, like one isolated one perhaps, that shows us how that can be achieved?
There's thousands, but can I think of one that would actually be relatable? It's the nuances of a negotiation and trying to listen to what your opponent, it's your supplier, but they're really your opponent. And what your opponent is trying to get from you is a win, and what you're trying to get from them is a win. And what you've got to do is make them think that they're winning, but also suggest lots of nuances that maybe they hadn't thought of, maybe you hadn't thought of till this live negotiation. These nuances that you hit upon, maybe because of something that they've said, that enable them to do a better job for you, better price for you, a better deal. And there's a million examples of that, but just trying to think of one that I could tell the story of is really difficult, because it's like every second of my life. It just happens naturally, because whatever I do in life, I'm always tipping the playing field in my favour, or trying to. Can't always achieve it.
And in other people's favour too. In 2013, you were one of the first British entrepreneurs to sign up to the Giving Pledge, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's initiative that encourages entrepreneurs to give away half of their wealth. A lot of that has been channeled into your own charity, Caudwell Children. I'd really like to know what you would say to other people in a similar position to yours, people who have achieved significant wealth through entrepreneurship, and they haven't yet made this commitment. What would you say to them?
Let me just correct a couple of the facts first.
Thank you.
I committed, when I sold the business, and suddenly I got not quite 1.5 billion because there were other people that I shared the money amongst, so there was a lot of beneficiaries within my business that benefited out of it as well. But whatever the sum of money that was left, I'm thinking this is a really ridiculous sum of money. What am I going to do with it all? And it sort of weighed quite heavily on my mind. So I came up with the idea, this was long before Gates and Buffett, I came up with the idea of pledging 50% of it in my will to charitable aims. So I put that in the will, I think probably about 2008. So I joined the Giving Pledge much later, just because it's then another name to their organisation, another influential name to try and set an example for other wealthy people. So I joined them, as you say, in 2013. And then, I'm not sure how long ago, but a few years ago, I increased it to 70% because I decided that 50% was still too much to leave to my family and make it 30% to be left. The pledge that I've made is to give 70% of my wealth away either during or after my lifetime. It's not all for Caudwell children at all, because Caudwell children have to survive on their own merit, as does any charity that I support. They have to, my money, I want it to leverage other people's money. I don't want to just give it and it's not done any good. I want to use commercial intellect. There's an example, actually. Let me give you that example, coming back to that question.
Yeah.
Because that's a really clear example of commercial intellect. So I'm at my butterfly ball, that's for Caudwell children, and I'm trying to raise £25,000 for wheelchairs from as many members of the audience as I can. The most I've ever raised is 900,000 in about 10 minutes for those. But sometimes it's more difficult than others. It depends on the generosity of the audience. So what I've done now with my brother, I've organised with him, who's very willing to donate £250,000 a year to Caudwell children. He's very willing to do that. So rather than him just donate or do anything else, I said, sit in the audience, bid on various items, make them more expensive. And, well, that's what we both do. You know, there's a lot of people in the audience probably hate us. Especially, and I do this quite regularly, especially when I run them up and I'm the end bidder, and then I've made them pay a lot more, but they've been taken out of the bid. It's my bid. And I say to the auctioneer, do this. And when I say that, what I'm saying to the auctioneer, and he understands this in advance, that I will donate that sum of money that I've just pledged, as long as the underbidder stands on the bid, and then he can have the prize and I'll just donate the money. That's commercial intellect. But that wasn't the example I wanted to give you. The example I wanted to give you was that I sit my brother in the audience. He's no good in just, giving the money away as a pledge or whatever. So when I'm doing the wheelchairs and I get to maybe, let's say, 10 wheelchairs, which is £250,000, and the audience are looking at me and thinking, I wish you'd go away. God, he's looking at me. That's 25,000 it's going to cost me if I give in. And they desperately just want you to go away. And I tell them I'll go away soon, but I haven't raised enough. And then my brother will put his hand up and say, come over here, and I'll speak to my brother, and he'll say, I will give you 5 wheelchairs if you can get another 5 wheelchairs out of the audience. Now, this audience that's already dried up, I will squeeze that extra 5 wheelchairs out, come hell or high water. The last one's sometimes painful. I've even been begging on my knees at a table and saying, look, just put 25 grand together. It's only 2.5 grand each. You can easily afford that. Put that together and then I'll get out your hair. And we always achieve the objective. And that's commercial intellect. It's simple and it's obvious, but people don't do it. And a lot of commercial intellect is simple and obvious because it's just finding a solution to the problem, to the challenge. There's the challenge. What do I do about the challenge? This is what I do. These are the options of how I change what's going on. Now, did I lose the plot of your question?
I'm going to pin you down on this. Yeah, I wanted to know what you would say to fellow entrepreneurs of similar standing who haven't yet made such a commitment to give 50, 70% of their
Well,
their
I
worth
feel
away?
quite strongly about this because I'm an out-and-out capitalist. Any of you guys in the room that slog your guts out, make a load of money, good luck to you, and that's fair and reasonable because you give effort that the average working person doesn't really understand or know about, and you have all that stress, and it's good luck to you. But if you make the sum of money that I have, then why would you want to cling on to it to yourself? So one of my big campaigns in life is trying to influence other wealthy people to join the Giving Pledge, because I don't understand why they wouldn't. They don't even have to give it away in their own lifetime. You know, they can give it away after they die. And all it means is their kids have a bit less. But they've still got hundreds of millions. How much do your kids need to be happy? It probably makes them more miserable than happy. So I don't agree with leaving colossal sums of money to your children when we've got a world where the gap between wealthy and poor is astronomical. And it's really immoral. It's immoral, the gap. But it is what it is, and that's capitalism. But it's the only solution that I believe we've got for a world that's full of incentive and drive and excitement. So we have to make the best of it. So the best of it is try and influence the wealthy people to give their wealth away, even if not during the lifetime, after it. And the other thing I campaign about, which is all of my Monaco friends, I think, resent me and dislike me for, is pay your taxes in the country that you've earned the money in. If you've done extremely well, don't be a Google or an Amazon and try and an Apple and try and fiddle all the tax you can. Okay, legitimately, but having massive corporate structures paying tens of millions of pounds to accountants to try and globalise a strategy whereby you pay almost no tax like Apple did. How immoral is that? You know, people are dying all over the world for lack of help, in the UK as well. And Apple creaming it for the shareholders, I think it's just so utterly immoral. And that's not to say I haven't done legitimate tax fiddles in the past. I have, when I was growing the business. I did them, I'm not proud of them. I did them and I understand why I did them, but would I do it now? Absolutely not. You know, it's because I've made the money. But you've got these great big multinational corporations who just think it's smart to pay no tax, and it all goes into the shareholders' pockets, and it's wrong.
You were asked a rhetorical question there when you were speaking, how much do your children need to be happy? That was a subject that came up when we were talking about philanthropy earlier. How much do your children need to be happy? You must have wrestled with this question yourself.
Well, I think the answer to that is nothing. You know, nothing.
I wonder if
because, you know, look, what do you need for happiness? I mean, I've taught my children from an early age that happiness, what you need to do to be happy is whatever you need to do, whether that's success in business, or whether it's having a 9-to-5 job and a lot of time at home to spend with your family. It's whatever you want. And I've always said to my children, there's only two things I want from you. One is for you to be happy, and the other is to make the world a better place. Well, giving them money doesn't make them happy. You know, look at people spoiling children, giving them too much money, even at a lower level. I'll tell you what I did with my daughter when she went to university. Both of them. They went to university and they wanted an allowance. And I said, right, I'll tell you what to do. When you've had a week or two at university, question all your classmates, find out what the maximum allowance people get and what the minimum is, and I'll give you the average. I hope they reported back to me, honestly, but I think they did, because I didn't give them very much, actually, and my daughter could never have a taxi or anything. She was always on the tube, or, you know, she had to watch every penny. In fact, most of the money that I gave her was spent on presents for the family. What do they need? They don't. They need love. They need coaching. They need inspiration. They need all of those things. They don't really need money. They need enough money to survive. I mean, people say, "Does money make you happy?" Every journalist always asks me that question. You know, do you need to be wealthy to make you happy? You absolutely do not need money to make you happy, but lack of money can make you very sad. That's for sure. people suffering hardship, as a lot of the families are going to be, especially single-parent families, pensioners, and people with ill health. A lot of those categories of people with this coming energy crisis and the coming recession are going to really, really be unhappy and struggle and fight. And that's very sad, and it's one of my bits of advice to the government. That's what you've got to sort out. You've got to sort out the poorer members of society, even if that costs a bit more tax for the wealthy people. Has to be done.
How optimistic are you about Liz Truss?
I'm not optimistic about any politician ever. If a politician does 10% of what's right, I'm quite impressed with their performance. And if we look at the last 2 years, there's been some good things happen. Whether you're a Remainer or a Brexiteer, doesn't matter. What Boris did was got Brexit mostly across the line. Whether he did the right things during COVID is very, very debatable. But what I do admire him for is his stance on the Ukraine, because we could not leave those people being slaughtered to foster our own standard of living. Our standard of living has to suffer as a consequence of the Ukraine. And that's right and proper, because why should we be able to go out for 3 meals a week when Ukrainian people are dying in a democratic society as a result of a megalomaniac slaughtering them? And it's just, for me, utterly unacceptable. And people often say to me when I talk like this, well, it's all right for you because you're wealthy. When I talk about cutting off the gas supplies, I said we should do that, not the other way around. And people say, yeah, but it's all right for you, you're wealthy, you can afford. And I said, look, I'll put a ski suit on, I'll turn my heating off, I'll put a ski suit on and have thermoware on, and I'll live in the same conditions as you. And I would do. I'm quite genuine about that. In fact, I sort of do. My partner said today the kitchen was 16 degrees. She said, and she got a jumper on and a coat. And I said, but there's an energy crisis. Why should we live in luxury just because I'm so wealthy when people around the country are suffering, and when actually there's this big energy crisis where we all need to save as much energy as possible. So I do try to an extent to practice what I preach. I can't completely, because I've got these ridiculous luxury assets like my yacht, which raises money for charity incidentally and makes a profit, and my helicopter. So, I could be accused of some degree of hypocrisy, but I do try to do the right thing.
And I want to turn for a moment, if we can, to property. Your business, Caudwell, has the tagline, the most magnificent residences in the world. Can you talk about why you decided to move into that industry and what opportunities you see there?
Well, I got into property originally in 2008 because of the crash. And there was a lot of very, very good assets going for sale at low prices because of the desperate situation in the world economy. So I started buying prime commercial investment property to rent out. Usually investment property, they got some development potential as well. And I did that, and I ended up a few years later thinking this is quite boring. But then what also happened is some opportunities came my way to buy sites that were amazing in Capdan-Tebe and also South Audley Street here in London in Mayfair. And I managed to buy them off the Irish bank. There was a bad Irish bank, Norma, that took all these assets in under a distressed situation. And I bought 2 lots of assets from them. And that's how I got into residential. It wasn't a strategy or a plan. I just saw the opportunity and grasped it. And having done that, I'm not that interested in making any more money, really. What I am interested in is success. So having done that, I wanted this property to be profitable, of course, because it's more money left to charity. But more than anything, I wanted it to be a legacy that I could be proud of. So I just put the title on the world's most prestigious apartment block. Not the biggest, but the most prestigious as a boutique development, if you like.
And the Audley Square development, it looks very exciting. It's in a very strategic location or important location. What can we expect from that?
Well, we've got the location to begin with. You know, it's in the heart of Mayfair Village, which is on the outskirts of Mayfair. Really, for those of you that you know it, it's quite a nice area around Mount Street and Hill Street and so on. So it's a great location. I asked the architects. Well, we interviewed every architect that we thought was prestigious enough to do the job, and the brief was Grand Mayfair Architecture. That's my brief that I gave to them. And nobody delivered upon it except one company, and weirdly, it was a company from New York who weren't even in London, and they came up with exactly Grand Mayfair Architecture. Now, that Grand Mayfair Architecture is very much more expensive than building a normal London box that people do. Yeah. Even the prestigious boxes, you know, it's way more expensive to do. It's very detailed in Portland stone and just very beautiful internally. And then what I wanted to do, of course, is the internal to match the external. So we looked at the world's most famous and, be wrong to say expensive designer, but the people that could deliver a product that was really exquisitely beautiful. You could build something more expensive than we've done because you could put gold railings around, solid gold. You know, you could be stupid about it. But what we've got is Bensley doing a spa, which is one of the most successful spa designers in Asia. And we've got Molyneux, who builds all the palaces around the world, doing some of the interiors. And we have got already the designs there that are going to be stunningly beautiful. And every attention to detail is paid in every last bit, even to the point, well, it's difficult to get into detail. I'll just give one example. I spotted about a year ago that when you came through some double doors, the double doors weren't really properly in line with one of the windows that looked out onto the courtyard. And I said, well, is there any reason we don't move those across just 6 inches or something like that? And we concluded it wasn't. And it's just that level of intricate detail to get everything to the... Most people would probably never notice, but to get it to the very, very best it could ever be.
Sure. And I was just looking down the list of sites and developments on the website for Caudwell. Several in France. Is it something about the French market, the French property market that you've spotted, or is that just the way the chips have fallen?
Well, I think the chips fell badly there because dealing with the French, have we got any French people in the house? One there. Well, I don't know whether you've got experience of dealing with the French authorities, but anyway, whether you have or not, it's not an edifying experience. And if I look at dealing with the London authorities, and people condemn planning and everything in Britain, but the difference between dealing with the British on a process like this and dealing with the French is astronomical. They're very bloody-minded and very, very difficult. So when you say, did the chips fall that way? Well, I wish they hadn't, because it's been a real painful, and it's still a painful situation where we're developing it. What we're building is something of real beauty. The same theory, you know, I want it to be a legacy, a beautiful building where even if it doesn't make very much money, or perhaps in the case of France, might make nothing. But I'll look back at it and think we did a beautiful job.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we can open to questions from the floor now. I think we've already had some come in on Slido, but we can do it the old-fashioned way as well if we have a microphone being passed round. Do raise your hands, and one of our colleagues will come and find you in a moment. I've got some already. One is, what is the best piece of advice you have been given or that you would give?
Well, the best piece of advice I was given was when I was really struggling in the early days of business. And I went to a young president's organisation event. They invited me just as a guest to see if I wanted to join. I didn't join because they'd got no charitable aims. And even then I was, you know, wanting charitable aims, not just a bunch of business people congratulating each other, which is what I thought the YPO ended up being. But anyway, one of the guest speakers there said, one of the questions in the audience was, how do you attract the best people? And it's a very simple answer, and that is pay the money. Now, we all know that you can pay the money and get very poor quality people. But there's one thing for sure, if you don't pay the money, you won't get the very best people applying. So you've got to pay what people are worth and pay the money. And I came back and immediately increased my adverts. This was in the very, very early days of Phones for You and Caudwell Group. And I just advertised at more expensive, much higher salaries. Of course, that gives a problem, because then the problem is, what about your existing employees? And I got those together, the ones that were in that comparative group. And I said, look, don't worry that I've advertised more money, because if these people are better than you, then that's justifiable. And if they're not better than you, they'll either go, because I won't carry on employing them, or I'll raise your salary. So you can't lose out of this. You're never going to lose. So just suffer the initial irritation that I'm advertising it beyond your salary. It's an experiment to see if I can get the right quality of people, and we'll fix it. And that's what management's all about, really. You know, it is about being trustworthy and people believing you'll do what you say and believing that you'll be fair. And that has always been my edict in dealing with everybody in life, whether it's suppliers, customers, or employees.
And one thing that we started to talk about earlier was management style. Reading about your management style in your book, and also listening to previous interviews you've given, it sounds in some cases like it might have been quite hard. Harsh but fair is probably a good description. Do you think that sort of generational shifts that we're seeing and changing attitudes among the different generations in the workforce mean that were you building Phones for You today, now, you would have to manage people in a different way, or would your style of work just as well today?
It's a very good question, and it's almost impossible to answer. I think what we've seen is a shift in the law, gradual shift in the law that tries to protect the employees more and more and more. But it was quite stringent in those days as well. You know, we're not going back quite to the dark ages. It's only 20 years ago that I was doing this. And so I would say that you can still be very hard with people. But then, if you're very hard, it's got to be inspirational and rewarding. You can't just be hard and that's all there is. And it has to be fair. People have got to trust you. And if you're hard, trustworthy, fair and inspirational, I think you can probably manage in much the same way. You'll always get tribunals. We did in those days, you know, I had 5,000 shop staff in the Phones for You business. I had some dreadful employees, I had some wonderful ones, but I had some dreadful ones. And I don't know whether I can say what I'm going to say, really. No, perhaps can't. But we all know the categories of people that you must be very, very careful if you want to discipline. There's categories of people that you've just got to be very, very careful in the way you discipline them. And I had lots of those. And we had, at one stage, quite a lot of tribunals. And there were, in some cases, there were people that had stolen money, but they still managed, because we couldn't prove it, they still managed to stack things against us. So it was pretty tough in those days as well, because I'd grown the business so fast, and we hadn't really got all the controls we needed in place to manage properly, effectively.
Okay. Another one of our audience questions is, has your attitude to choosing causes changed over time in philanthropy? So during the course of your philanthropic career, your giving career, has your attitude to the way you select the things you support changed?
No, not really. The principles are always the same, which it's got to be a really strong humanitarian cause. I'm very pro-children, just for the simple fact that, I could have chosen strokes and heart attacks because my parents died of that and their parents died of them. I could have chosen that, but, an older life of 70 or 80 that has a stroke, is that as worthy a cause as a 6-year-old kid who desperately needs help, who desperately needs to have a life ahead of them? So children I'm very, very biased towards. So most of my causes would be to do with children and young adults, people who have not been gifted a life that's acceptable, and to try and make their life the best that it can possibly be. But I will generally help any cause if A, the charity is super efficient, B, there's no nepotism in the charity, and you'd be amazed how much nepotism exists within charitable organisations, and it sickens me, people with the snout in the trough. And finally, really, I like my money to be leveraged. So normally, Geordie Greig came to me once, and Geordie Greig, by the way, he's the editor of the Mail now. He was the editor of the Evening Standard at the time, and he came to me and said, would I support London's homeless? I said, well, what's the deal? He said, well, at the moment, I've got nobody who's supporting it. He said, but David Cameron has told me that he will match fund anybody that donates. And if you donate 100 grand, I can get other wealthy people who will join in, and then David Cameron will match fund it. So, of course, I did it. And he raised 1.1 million. And that's, a really central component of my charitable giving. I don't want it just to be all my money. I want my money to influence other people to be as charitable as they can possibly be. And it's a sort of a catalyst. It's like my brother offering 5 wheelchairs enabled me to get another 5 out of the audience.
Very good. This is a good audience question. There's a school of thought that claims every visionary eventually needs an integrator in order to scale up. Did you have one? And if so, when did you realise you needed them?
An integrator?
I think that's a function within your business, a sort of a trusted executive who meshes things together within the company. That's my reading of it.
Yeah. Well, clearly I had a lot of great people, because you could not build a business the size I had without a lot of great people. But I can tell you all of those great people needed a massive amount of my management time to help them be great, to keep them great, and keep them performing at the level. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because when people are successful, and my organisation was successful right the way through, with various ups and downs, as we've mentioned, but predominantly very, very successful, and arrogance and complacency creeps in. And I always remember one of my guys in a board meeting, he was the managing director of it, I won't mention his name, but he was the managing director of Phones for You, and he was dishing Carlton Warehouse. Now, Carlton Warehouse were a major competitor, but he was sort of rubbishing them away and, talking about them as if we're the bee's knees, we're the kings of the castle. And we weren't, actually, we weren't. Carphone Warehouse were doing a bloody good job. And I really took him to task on that, because it was ridiculous what he was saying, but more importantly, there was the complacency and the conceit. And complacency and arrogance and conceit is an absolute death in a business, because you've always got to respect your competition. Understand if they're weaker, but even the weaker competition maybe do something better than you do. And you've got to recognise that and always fight to be the best that you can possibly be, and leave the competition standing for dead if you can. But never just sit back on your laurels and think, oh, we're way ahead of the competition, all's fine, because that is the time that you go under, backwards. And you don't want to be doing that.
I think we've got a question in the front row.
John, may I ask, firstly, the inspiration for the title of your book, The Love, the Pain and the Money. And secondly, can I ask, what is your greatest, in your sense, your opinion, the greatest professional or philanthropic accomplishment? What are you most proud of achieving?
Well, the book, first of all, was when I started writing the book, which was it was a pure consequence of pandemic, because I'd never had the time. People had been asking me to write it for 20 or 30 years. I never had the time. And so I sat down with the autobiographer, the ghostwriter, and started telling my story. And I just told my story freely and openly. And what came through was that title, A Lot of Pain, a lot of love, and a lot of money. And when we were searching for a title, those were the 3 words that described my life. So love, pain, money became the title. Second part of your question was, I don't very often allow pride in my life because, as I said earlier on, I'm very wealthy. There's hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people around the world that desperately need help. I've done a lot for society, but there's so much more I could do if I had the time and the money, actually, because my money is all tied up in the business at the moment because of all this property. But there is so much more I could do, and I just hope I live long enough to liquidate all these assets that I've got, sell all these properties, and do a hell of a lot more within my lifetime instead of the money being after my lifetime. But of course, I do take pride in the 65,000 children that we've helped. This year, we're scaling up to try and help 15,000 this year. Only that today I've been talking to a charity that's looking like going into liquidation and talking about how I can save the day for them. They're helping disadvantaged young people. And I've been talking to them how I might rescue that situation. But it doesn't matter how much we achieve, there's so much more to be done. And so I am sort of proud. I don't want to play it down too much. I'm happy, let's say, with who I am and what I do. But there is a lot more I should do and could do and need to do. But there's just not enough hours in the day, and I don't know how to do it. People say to me, "Why are you so under pressure?" So, well, I can't help it. And they say, "Well, of course you can. You make the decisions." So what decision am I going to make? Am I going to stop building Mayfair, stop building, I'm in it now. I'm trapped. I don't mind being trapped, but I am. Can't just bail out. I've got to do it. Or do I stop my charity work, which takes 50% of my working hours, along with my partner, Modesta? Do we stop doing that? And the answer is no, I can't stop any of it, so I carry on grafting, and I'd like to do more, and maybe I will be able to if I'm lucky enough to live long enough to see all of these projects come to fruition and still have the energy to give to help make the world a better place.
Fantastic. On that note, we are going to have to wrap things up, and in a moment I will hand over to Charlie Walsh of the Owo Residences by Raffles. But John Caudwell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I think we'd all like to show our appreciation for your time. Thank you very much.